What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here, and if all goes well, I am shipping a bunch of changes to 80 carries for patch 13.2 for League of Legends. There was always a chance this gets cut, but I am very confident it will go live, though of course again a possibility it will not. But it will be on PBE on Monday or Tuesday based on when the build goes out, and then should be in actual patch notes a week from Tuesday, and then live for everybody on Wednesday. So all goes well, we're gonna have the changes live in about 2 weeks time, week and a half time. And I'm gonna try to be a little bit concise in this video because I think my patch rundowns run pretty long. I think that's kind of that's kind of the point there, I guess, but I'm gonna try to be a little more concise with this video, and I got what we're trying to do. So in general, there are two-ish goals. There's 3 goals I'm trying to hit, to varying degrees, and then sort of one follow-up as a result of one of the goals. Okay, so I collected opinions on what 80 carries felt was different now compared to before, and looked at things like how many people were queuing for the role, in which like matchmaking rating bands, and kind of my own opinions and what measures we do have of power level. Ultimately, TLDR, I actually don't think 80 carries a weak role. I think it's actually fine, power level wise. However, it clearly has become unappreciable. That even non-80 carry players think 80 carry is a weak role, and 80 carry players, more than players of any other role, believe that their role is the least fun to play. So those are both very, very big problems. The perception of power is low. The perception of fun is low. So it doesn't matter if the role is actually strong, or if I think the role is actually strong. Players don't think it is, which means I think we have room to straight buff the role. Also, I really, really want to skew towards satisfaction, because satisfaction over power. Because it's worth noting that even though players kind of ubiquitously think that 80 carry is pretty weak, they generally think it's about as weak as top lane. And I'm not trying to make top lane the worst role in the game. So I'm not trying to give that much power. And I know right now there's some talk about mid laners feeling disempowered to play mages. That's its own thing. I'm not going to get into that too much. But like, there is a very quick snowball of things that goes on when you start saying, well, if we buff one role, kind of by nature everything else must go down, and I don't want them to go down very much. So anyway, approach number 1 was to give players an outlet for frustrations with the role. So this, I targeted, my very first set of changes were targeted at runes and items, and not specifically at champions, because I wanted players to be able to say, look, I have options I didn't before. I can consider something, and this can alleviate my frustrations. If I feel too squishy, I can become tankier. Now, that tankiness is going to come at a cost. I'm not going to buff 80 carries by 80 health or something, but allow 80 carries to opt into more durability in the way that other roles get to, and 80 carries don't really seem to. I think there is room for a more expansive suite of 80 carry defensive options. In terms of shipping things in the span of a week and a half, which is what kind of has happened here. That wasn't going to happen, but I'm happy with the change that we did here. So there's 2 changes in terms of 80 carries can feel more durable. Number 1 is I'm buffing overheal. So overheal is going from 10 plus 9% max HP to 20 to 300 based on champion level. I want to note this is not linear scaling. This actually scales 20 per level until level 14, then slows down 15, 16, 17, 18, and just goes from 280 to 300. So this is actually better than it looks on paper. That's maybe a failing. There's 2 competing goals here. 1, I want the patch notes to read well. I want to convince 80 carry players their role is good. I want them to read the tooltips on their runes and say, this thing is strong. I want them to experience the rune and be like, this feels effective. But at the same time, I also don't want to overbuff 80 carries. And I think letting you get your mid-game durability spike without careening you off into the moon at level 18, where you become invulnerable, that is a key concern that I have. I think it is incredibly squishy, or incredibly important, that 80 carries do remain some level of squishy, especially in the late game, where they are the completely unstoppable damage machines that we all know that they are at 5 and 6 items. So it's a tough balance because I can't really do both. And so I said, hey, we're going to scale linearly and then slow down a little bit. And I think that's going to be reasonable. This is definitely stronger at all points in time. Levels 1 through 4, it is weaker. around level 4, level 5, based on the champion you're playing. Like if you longsword start and don't have a lot of max HP, I think like Ashe has relatively low max HP. It's better at level 4. But if you're like Kai'Sa with a Doran's Blade, it's better at level 5. Either way, it scales off into the moon from there, and it is not an amazing early laning rune, but I mean, from 6 onwards, obviously, and especially in the mid-game team fights, you'll have a substantially larger shield as long as you can opt into getting some level of lifesteal in your build to fill this shield up. I think it's a good change. I think it's going to be positive. I think players will appreciate that they have a rune that was pretty much unpicked and pretty much horrible. That is now a bit more playable. And specifically the reason I wanted to nerf the early levels was this rune has occasionally been a pro problem of stifling too much action because you just overheal off of one Soraka W and you can no longer all in the Kai'Sa or whatever. And so first few levels want to make that a little bit weaker so that it wasn't going to be a problem, because overheal had been nerfed in the past because of things like that. And so I didn't want this to become a pro problem. And so I did a small preemptive nerf levels 1 through 3, and that should be fine. The next change I think is actually even more impressive, or should actually, I should say, help carries even more, is I am buffing Bloodthirster. So the first line you actually should look at is Bloodthirster is a cheaper item. Now this change went through more iterations than anything else I had done this patch. I think this is version, 8 or 9 of the item at this point. For me, I really, really want to get this item down to 3,000 gold. My first version of the change list was 3,000 total gold, and the lifesteal was cut from 18 to 10%. Now, gold efficiency-wise, that's fine. That's 8% lifesteal costs about 400 gold. The problem is it ruins some of the experience of Bloodthirster being a huge lifesteal item. The idea being like, ooh, I took a max range Zoe Q or Nidalee Spear, let me go hit Raptors in full heal, is like what you buy this item for. And ensuring that still happens, I think, is actually very, very important. And so ultimately, the compromise was less of a nerf on lifesteal and less cost reduction. 3,200, of course, is still one of the most expensive items in the game for AD carry, but at least it's not Infinity Edge or Mythic level price. And that should help a little bit. The other thing that could have been done was cutting BF Sword out of the build, because right now Bloodthirster gives 55 AD and has a BF Sword and a Vamp Scepter in it. And BF Sword, Vamp Scepter gives 55 attack damage. So realistically, there wasn't room to make this item any smaller on the AD side without crushing the build path. And I didn't have the heart to remove BF Sword from Bloodthirster for the first time in the history of League of Legends. That the goal of these changes is to make AD carries feel more empowered, and removing a BF Sword, I just think, has this psychic damage to it where the item's going to feel nerfed, and I don't want to do that. I don't want the item to feel nerfed. I think players can understand 3 lifesteal, 200 gold, fatter shield, that's a buff. Even though I wanted it 3k gold, I'm not sure I can reach that right now, and so I'm happy with a buff, even if it's not the ideal buff, because maybe the ideal buff doesn't exist. I want to make sure something good was shipping, even if I couldn't find what I really, really, really wanted. Worth noting, on the shield, I'm doing what happened with the Mythic item update back a couple years ago, where items that you clearly can't buy at level 1 don't have level 1 values functionally. The way this is coded, by the way, in the actual game is the level 1 value is 180, and then at level 10 start scaling. So 1 through 9 is the same number. Just because it has 2 things. One, primarily it's honest, right? Like, Bloodthirster has never in its history given a 50-point shield, because no one has ever bought in Bloodthirster first item. It requires more than 10 kills, and you're not going to buy it, right? That's not going to happen. But the other one is, so other than honesty, is it makes it look more impressive. 50 to 320 looks weaker than 180 to 450, because of course it does, right? It's objectively higher by 130, period. The shield is up by 130. This was an accident, by the way. The 130 was an accident in terms of the numbers are actually as much higher. Really, I just said, okay, well, I want to start at level 9, because that's, I think, just a fair first item spot. If you want to buy BT first, I guess you can. It starts there. And 180 was basically rounding up the old number. And then I looked for some smooth linear scaling. For the most part, there was a version where I scaled 180 up to 280 and then flattened down to 320. Same with the overheal thing. But instead I decided, you know what? No, this is an item that I think is allowed to scale to the moon. I think it's okay if a rune falls off. I think an item is something you opt into and really try to play with. And so screw it. Let's go ahead and scale this one really hard. Does actually make BT Rush a bit worse, considering that the shield more than doubles in value level 18 compared to level 9. So in terms of what is BT at 90 versus BT at 18, it's more than twice as good. I believe AD carry health does not double between those points in time. Level 9 is going to give you more than half of your total health. So that does something a little bit weird, but ultimately I'm pretty comfortable with this. I think this buff is fine, and keep in mind that, you know, if you're in a world where the AD carries level 18, you're in a world where the Zed is level 18 and can one-shot you through the shield anyway, and I'm actually relatively comfortable with the amount of extra health I'm giving AD carries here. In late game builds, this is like about 120, it's about 120 up as well. That 240 extra health is certainly pretty meaningful. It's like 10% more health they had before via shields, but I'm actually pretty comfortable that assassins can still do their jobs. If they can't, these will have to be nerfed back down, but that's the hope, right? So you can now buy Bloodthirster and feel a bit better about it. Okay, so AD carries can opt into, right, not baseline, AD carries can opt into durability when they want to, which is a goal I wanted to hit. I had spiked a change to Nullifying Orb. I cut it because it had too much collateral damage onto mid lane. I didn't want to nerf mages even more. They already feel pretty bad, so after one played, I was like, yeah, okay, this is wrong. We can't make Syndra feel worse than she does already. It's actually really popular, like Syndra and her ilk, other mid lane mages, like they don't need to face Nullifying Orb more than they already do. I'm not going to buff that. It feels too risky. And so we cut that change and moved on to other stuff. All right, well, there is a knock-on effect that's happening. Because we're buffing Overheal, about half of AD carries just go, oh, okay, I'll just stop running Triumph, I'll run Overheal, no big deal. I'll start running Legend Alacrity, I'll run Legend Bloodline, no big deal. We'll get Overheal, we'll get the shield. But some AD carries are really, really hard bound to Presence of Mind. That in most cases, actually a couple where it's not true. In most cases, every common Presence of Mind user in bot lane, it is their dominant rune choice. It is their best rune by far. It is way better than Triumph, which has a pretty flat value across all AD carries, and it's ubiquitously better than Overheal because Overheal sucks. And so as follow-up work, I went to go buff the mana, specifically the scaling mana, of a bunch of AD carries who are reliant on Presence of Mind. I'm targeting about 1% win rate, and here's the list of changes. So Ashe, Caitlyn, Ezreal, Jhin, Jinx, Kai'Sa, Lucian, Misfortune, Senna, Sivir, Twitch, and Xayah are all getting some amount of mana growth and mana regen growth. In some cases, I'm rounding stats down a little bit, so 8.05 becomes 8, 8.18 becomes 8. I'm rounding down Lucian a little bit here as well, but giving him a little bit extra mana regen growth, or mana growth overall. In some cases, I'm flattening their second ranked abilities. So in the case of Sivir, Ricochet longer scales in mana. In the case of Jinx, Zap doesn't scale quite as hard. In the case of Jhin, W doesn't scale quite as hard. And Captive Audience, which is what you max last, is going to stay flat, so you don't randomly have your spell cost increase at level 15 when, I mean, it doesn't matter in the first place, right? So this is more just like to sort of read good in the text of the patch notes. If you want to scroll through the video and look at the exact changes, feel free. But ultimately, this is targeting about 1% positive win rate in mana growth. I am not trying to make the laning phase even bigger bully-wise. I'm not trying to change what the early game feels like between these champions, so that Ashe isn't just spamming way more volleys lane than she was before, because that's been a very, very delicate touch point for that champion before. But to say, look, once you get into mid-game, the champions who are relying, because keep in mind, Presence of Mind is two things, okay? Presence of Mind not only gives you mana when you tag an enemy champion, it also gives you mana on takedown, which lets you refill that mana bar to keep fighting in a team fight. That's more what I'm targeting here. I'm not trying to alleviate your laning phase concerns. I'm going to make sure your champion functions in mid to late game team fights, because I think playing AD carry is hard enough as it is without having to balance a mana bar around a class that doesn't get to buy mana items. I mean, aside from a very few examples like Senna and Ezreal, who do find themselves buying Mana Mune, you can see Essence Reaver on champions like Lucian once in a while, but for the most part, these champions don't itemize mana because the options are a little bit too bad, or they don't fit the character well enough, or there's too many other competing priorities. Alleviate this rune priority and say, no, it's okay, even if you don't pick this rune, your mid to late game is going to feel better because you won't quite as hard. And it's okay, you can remove some of that mind share. I think mana buffs in general will tend to skew toward lower MMR, where AD carry Q health is at the worst. This is where the fewest people are queuing AD carries at low MMR, so if I can make the class just feel a little bit nicer, people use modern a lot. I don't know if modern's the right term for it, but just to make the class feel nicer to people who are running out of mana, this should help. And so that's a lot of the goals here. I think it was actually very intelligent that it got pointed out to me, and I think it was really worth chasing down. That, yeah, ultimately should feel a lot better to play these champions in this world. Okay, great. So that was the basically follow up for it was follow up for what's it called? Overheal being good rune, letting people pick anti-tank options. But I think even without anti-tank options, like even without overheal, I'm actually very happy that this change is happening. I think it's actually very good that AD carriers get to shed some of their mana constraints. So then we have item changes, offensive item changes. So this to me is, I think, the big pinnacle of the patch. I think it's actually a very, very big deal. And it's the fact that you can buy Infinity Edge and Quick Blades second. I think it's like very, very, very big deal, mostly feel-wise. There is some brief analysis done on build path and DPS per gold. And the sort of midpoint for Infinity Edge, Kraken Slayer, Phantom Dancer champions was that if you got all the way to IE second, with the new change where IE's crit damage turns on at 2 items, you would do about 4% more DPS per gold. Now, there's bigger winners like Tristana, who have a attack speed steroid on her kit, as well as a very aggressive AD ratio on explosive charge, are going to really care about moving stats away from attack speed and onto attack damage, right? So there's bigger winners like that. And then there's smaller winners who, maybe like Sivir. So Sivir's like a Quick Blades user, actually, at least in the current live version of the game. She runs Quick Blades more than IE, and correctly so. It seems to be correct. Champions like that who, aren't going to win as hard, right? So there's a bit of back and forth there, but ultimately, it's about 4% DPS per gold in the average case of IE users. Now, it's worth noting, though, that old Phantom Dancer, keep in mind, or current Phantom Dancer, still Phantom Dancer, it gives 7% move speed or 14% after letting a few autos in combat. So 4% more DPS per gold, but 7 to 40% less move speed is not as absurd of a power spike as you might think. Now, again, playtesting this all week, this feels great. IE second feels amazing, and I'm super happy that we're going to be shipping this, because I think it really just does a lot to feel good about the class. But if you're like, oh my gosh, right, you're roughing 80 carries, I'm here to be mad, I'm here to take my pitchfork up, it's not as much power as you might think. It's actually not egregious. And the numbers are low enough where I'm like, okay, you did the math. I'm very comfortable that, like, even if this is power positive, it is not absurd, and we should ship this. So we're pretty sure we're going to. Second to that is a little bit of make good stuff. So Blade of the Ruin King is getting buffed from 8 to 9% on ranged champions. Now, this was initially concepted as an option because I wanted Blade of the Ruin King, I wanted it to be more of an outlet as an anti-tank option. But what it ends up doing, because we're shipping Infinity Edge as far as I can tell, is this actually allows other champions to keep up with IE users, right? So if you're looking at Zaya's core build path or like a Misfortune build path, where he's going to be really happy to have IE second. So if you look at on-hit champions, like, I don't know, Varus doesn't run it very often, but you can look at options like Twitch, or you can look at like Ashe has a side grade build that does this. Kog'Maw is the big user here, where it's like, there are some champions who just didn't get this buff, and certainly their power spikes actually feel pretty smooth. I think on-hit Varus feels pretty good power spike-wise. I think Twitch feels good power spike-wise. I think Kog'Maw feels good power spike-wise. But even just like on keeping the role somewhat at parity, a small Blade of the Ruin King buff both allows some champions to switch out for Rage Blade in some cases, because they are going to consider a good anti-tank item. Rage Blade Hurricane is a good build on plenty of champions. Ashe is a good Rage Blade Hurricane user. Ruin King Hurricane user. It's actually pretty good. It's an early power spike, damage is solid, and obviously Hurricane feels really good at the item. So it's a bit of parity and a bit of item choice. But what's interesting, though, is what happens when you play IE second is that now, certainly it's going to crush a lot of your second item choices, right? Most champs are going to be like, well, screw it, go IE. But third item choices open up a lot. They open up a huge amount. Because suddenly it's like, okay, now that I'm gearing toward my third item, people have actually striated in terms of armor and health and whatnot. Like, has the Maokai gone Frozen Heart and Sunfire Cape and Steel Caps? I know those are mythics, but like, for example, did the Irelia go Wits End Ruin King, and so she doesn't have any bonus armor and health? Okay, we're gonna skip LDR for now. And this allows you to then pivot and say, okay, I'm now going to build toward my, like, I think what happens here is they get to build towards their choice, right? So, okay, the Mythic, honestly, unfortunately, doesn't have a lot of choice in it. And your choice of IE versus Quick Blades versus whatever your like old pinnacle third item would be, not a lot of choice in that one either. And to be fair, IE second is not really much choice, right? You're going from no choice 1, no choice 3 to no choice 1, no choice 2. However, I think the experience is much better this way because you go no choice 1, no choice 2, a lot of choices on 3. Lord Dominik's, Phantom Dancer, Hurricane, Rapid Fire Cannon, Bloodthirster, which just got buffed, maybe Guardian Angel because you really, really care about Zed. I think there are a wealth of 3, 4, 5 items out there that basically two things, right? So more of the game has happened, so you have a more informed choice going in. Like, you can't go GA second, and old BT second was too expensive, and, otherwise you'd be like, well, I always buy Phantom Dancer Hurricane because I'm a Phantom Dancer Hurricane user, so, there wasn't really room for a choice on 2 either. Like, it actually just turns out it was no choice 1, no choice 2, no choice 3, and now it's no choice 1, no choice 2, big choice 3. So in terms of sort of top-down choice matrix, I think it's much better. I also think the experience is far better as well because every AD carry in the world is just waiting until they hit Infinity Edge. I mean, not every, because some of them actually use Rage Blades, some of them use Quick Blades, some of them have different builds, whatever, it's fine. They don't actually need IE. Not in all cases. But for most of them, they're just waiting until Infinity Edge comes online. And Modern League of Legends, the last 3 years, the only world where IE was the third item you bought. And I actually think, the more I've thought about the space, the more I think a lot of the other design goals were good, but I think IE third just is not what AD carries want to have happen. And so pushing IE back to second, basically what was to center myself back in on it. I think if you are choosing among options and don't get there until the game ends, that is okay. Mages need to choose, can I get to Void Staff? Can I get to Death Cap? Can I go for this Zhonya's third? Can I? And it's it's nice if we get there, but, I got my first 2 items and I should feel pretty good on the first 2 items. If 80, mages don't have to get Death Cap to feel like they're playing a mage, is what I'm trying to say, right? Tanks don't have to get a Death Dance to feel like they're playing a fighter. Don't have to get a Death Dance to feel like they're playing a fighter. You look at champions like Rammus, and he buys Thornmail first item. Rammus feels like Rammus really early on. Maokai feels stupid at Demonic Embrace at item 1, right? And IE is so core to crit auto-attacking marksman not getting there ever, or not getting there at all in half your games, I think is a huge deal breaker for those players. And it's look, you might still lose. You're not actually that much more powerful than pre-patch, but being I'm actually getting to IE every game if I don't get hard stomped in lane. Not getting 2 items is you didn't earn 7,000 gold this game, dog, you had a horrible game, right? And that will happen, right? You can fail to get 2 items. I can fail to get 2 items sometimes, but getting to Kraken IE or getting to Gale Force IE or whatever, that's going to be reliably happening. And so at least your crits are going to feel good in almost every game you play. And that is the really big win here. That AD carries are at least going to feel like they became the AD carry in many, many more of the game. That's why I'm very attached to this list. I'm super, every time I'm told, hey, but be careful, this is going to change class balance. Draven's going to love this shit because he doesn't want attack speed on his items, he has attack speed on his W. Triss is going to love this shit because he has her Q already and she wants her AD ratio on explosive charge. And I'm yes, those are true. And you have champions like maybe Aphelios, who actually cares about what's happening with Phantom Dancer and Hurricane, and he didn't really mind getting attack speed on him a little bit, and he's not going to spike on IE as hard as Tristana's going to. And I'm and I don't care, because every AD carry is going to feel so much better, feeling like they're a real champion at 2 items. The power level is not actually that much higher, because attack speed is actually a good stat, especially for Kraken Slayer builds, but I think this is a really, really big deal. This should feel really, really good. So I know it's basically one line of text here, but this is, to me, the big thing on this patch. Everything else is going to be useful and help, but that is kind of where I am with this one. So that's what's in the patch. It's really only 4 buckets of changes, right? There's an IE and Quick Blades change. There's a Blade of the Ruin King change. There is an Overheal change. There is a Bloodthirsty Extra 5. And there is some mid-game mana for AD carries. I don't mind following up and doing more AD carry mana buffs if this feels needed. I didn't think it was worth it. I didn't think it was really in scope. I think these are the ones who actually have mana constraints. I'm using Presence of Mind as the tester of that. And I think that is reasonable to wean them off the rune and move on from there. So that's the update. I think it's really cool. Let me know how you feel about it. This does not mean there is no work ever to be done ever again on AD carry, but I'm really curious because if people are wow, this feels really, really good, there might be a bigger fire, right? That like, I'm not saying AD carry is not a perfectly designed role. I don't think I've solved every issue. There should always be weaknesses in the class in the first place. That's just going to be the case for every class and every role in the game, for every champion in the game. That's always going to be the hope, that there's always going to be weaknesses out there that other players can exploit, so that you're not just an unkillable, win the game machine. But yeah, I really hope you all like the changes. I really do think you're going to really, really enjoy IE second. I think it's going to be really nice. And you have options of speccing in a durability with Overheal and Bloodthirster, so that you can feel more empowered to take durability into your own hands, where if the Soraka won't peel for you, if Leona's only engaging and won't summon Nectin, you can at least go Overheal Bloodthirster and live. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.